everybody, and welcome to today's presentation from our OR group, so Ageing with Expectation. And today's topic, the second in our series, is on managing conflict in relationships. And again, I welcome Reverend Dr. Stephen Koski, who's going to speak to us on this topic. And we look forward to today's session. So thank you, Stephen.
Great to be here. Great to see you again. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to engage in an important topic, I think, as we focus on aging well and aging with better mental health and aging with better relationships.
Great, thank you. And like all of our sessions, certainly in Australia, we like to open them with an acknowledgement to country. So the Cairnmillar Institute, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. And indeed, you might be clicking in from all around the world. And so it's an opportunity to pay our respects to any of our elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who might be tuning in today, or indeed Indigenous elders and people from your communities who may be tuning into this presentation. We extend this respect to all Indigenous peoples from around the world and to any First Nations people who come across the material that we're presenting. So thank you, Stephen. I think I'll leave it to you to take us through this next section. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. And want to just take a second to pause and to remember Dr. Francis Macnab, who initiated the OS series and who made such profound and rich contributions to so many lives. Really is an honor to continue to be part of this program as a way to honor a person who's impacted my life profoundly and impacted so many others. So I just want to take a second to remember and celebrate Dr. Macnab, who I had long-standing relationship with and had more than a few conflicts with. So I'm delighted to engage in this what I think really important topic. Conflict and how do we manage conflict? And so often we think the goal is to avoid conflict, when in actual fact, I don't think we can avoid conflict. I think conflict is actually inevitable. It's kind of the stuff of life. And so the goal isn't so much to avoid conflict, but the goal is to engage in conflict in a healthy way, which can strengthen our relationships. Because I actually believe that really rich relationships exist on the other side of conflict. I often say conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. So part of what we're going to explore today are some ways that we might avoid combat, avoid unhealthy interactions, but actually navigate our way through conflict in a way that our relationships are better at the end. There's a few points that I'm going to suggest that are worthy to consider, such as valuing relationships over being right. You know, how can we lower the temperature when the conversations are heated? And how can we shift from judgment and blaming to curiosity? Because a lot of research, and actually last time we met, we cited a study from Harvard University that said the most important characteristic to quality of life, to health, to happiness as we age is the quality of our relationships. And the quality of our relationships really equals the quality of our conversations, the quality of our interactions. And I think the quality of our conversations equals our capacity to have difficult conversations, our capacity to be able to navigate the conflicts that are inevitable in such a way that our relationships in our lives aren't diminished, but actually can be enhanced as the result of somehow managing our way through conflict. There was a study out of, I think, the University of Wisconsin that asked 1,000 people over the age of 90, if you had your life to live over again, what would you do differently? And believe it or not, again, the studies have concluded this. They said, well, the number one thing is I would pay more attention to my relationships, to all of my relationships. I would invest more in relationships. And they said, I would forgive more easily. I would extend more grace. I would perhaps kind of not take things so personally. So that kind of wisdom happens when we're over 90. So part of what today is about is, can we gain and garner some of that wisdom before we hit the age of 90? So I really believe that it's not our differences that divide us. Difference of ideas, difference of viewpoints. It's not our differences that create the conflict that divide us. It's actually how we engage those differences. Because we're always going to have differences. But can we engage those differences in a different way and in a healthy way? So what are some keys? What are some ways? Karen Horney, I think, do I pronounce that right? I always pronounce her name wrong. Horney, I think, the great psychoanalyst. She says at any given time, there are three movements. At any given time in any relationships, with our thoughts and with our behavior, we're doing one of three things. We're either moving against the other person, we're moving away and distancing ourselves from the other person, or we're moving towards the other person. So that's the question. And the moving against and the moving away happens. But how can we move towards and build greater trust? How can we turn combat into connection? So I'm going to suggest a few things, and we'll invite you, Kathryn, to contribute your ideas and your thoughts and your tips. But the first thing I'd like us to focus on is actually valuing the relationship over being right. I think that's one of the most important ways that we can experience conflict in a different way. I don't think any one of us on our deathbed is going to say, "Oh, I knew I was right." And sometimes we actually start from the place we are right, rather than starting valuing the relationship. Because if we start from the place we are right, our focus is going to be on proving the other person wrong. And more than likely, that's either going to distance us from that person or pit us against that person rather than moving towards that person. I love Brene Brown, who said, "I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right." She said, less combat, less armor, and more learning. Because what we forget is that conflict, at least most of the conflict, I would argue, I'd be interested in your thoughts. I would argue that 95%, and I'm pulling that number out of the air, but 95% of our conflict is not about facts that can be proven right or wrong. Conflict is generally about perceptions, opinions, feelings, values, where there can actually be more than one right. I mean, if we're arguing and if we're having conflict about, does the bank open at 9 or 9:30, I suggest calling the bank. Generally speaking, most of the conflict we're having in life, it's not about facts. It's about our opinions. It's about our values. It's about our perceptions. There's a beautiful poem by an Israeli poet called Yehuda Amici. And he said, "From the places we are right, flowers never grow in the spring. The places we are right are hard and trampled ground." So we often start our conversations from the perspective of where we think we are right. So rather than taking the opportunity to listen, to engage the other, our primary focus then is proving the other person is wrong. But the point I want to make is when we value relationships over being right, it doesn't mean you're wrong. So it doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean surrendering your viewpoint. It means you value the relationship. So your focus is on keeping the dialogue going. Your focus is on creating the kind of relational container that can hold the tension of opposing ideas, where you're actually willing to listen rather than teach, so to speak, if that makes sense. I often say, imagine if we entered every conversation as if we have something to learn, as opposed to something to prove. So it's asking ourselves the question, did I learn something, or was I primarily focused on trying to prove my point? And back to Karen Horney's, can we move from opposing viewpoints to actually try to get a common viewing point? And vulnerable conversations that I think lead to deeper understanding, that lead to deeper trust, conversations that move from combat to connection, generally have more questions than answers. So it's asking ourselves in our conversations in the midst of conflict, is our tendency generally to make statements or ask questions? And more often than not, it's the questions that can lead to trust and a deeper understanding and better relationships. So what do you think?
I think they sound like excellent points, Stephen. So thank you for sharing that. And I think the valuing relationships is also something that is critical through the conflict and to learn from it. I know we have a saying that talks about being hard on the issues and soft on the person. And I think that in that way that the person you're having the conflict with, that you're always trying to remember in the back of that conflict, mind you, there's all these perceptions and emotions going on. And sometimes it's easy to start bringing the person into the conflict or making it about them. But I think what's really important is to remember that it's about the issue, and the issue that is in conflict and that you're trying to resolve, and not to make it too personal about the other person. So being hard on the issue and soft on the person.
I really love that. In the United States, as you're very aware, there's a lot of division. There's a lot of conflict. And I've noticed a shift in the last dozen or so years, that there's been a profound shift in conversations from contempt over someone's ideas. I mean, there have been differences of opinions and differences of ideas from the beginning of time. But there's been a huge shift as I notice conversations on a societal level and even in families. I mean, families are being broken apart because we've shifted from a contempt over ideas to a contempt for the person holding those ideas. There's been this subtle shift that I think has had a profound impact in the quality of our community conversations. And I think if we can go back to being hard on the issues and soft on the person, I often say, when's the last time that you changed someone's mind or improved a relationship by calling them stupid? or when's the last time you changed someone's mind because you convinced them they were wrong? And I'm guessing the answer would be never. And research has proven that the paradox is that when you throw what you think are facts at someone, when you throw facts at someone that you think are going to prove your point, it actually serves to harden their convictions. So when you are trying to prove your point with what you think is factual, you're actually creating distance rather than mutual understanding. You know, my favorite story is I had a situation where a husband came to see me, and he said to me, my wife and I are having so much conflict. You know, we always seem to be kind of fighting and clashing and misunderstanding. And he said, quite frankly, I just don't understand her. She's wrong. I just do not understand her. It's like she's coming from another planet. I just can't see her viewpoint. And so I said, quit trying. Quit trying to understand her. Instead, make it your mission in life for her to feel understood. And to recognize those are two entirely different approaches. Because if my goal is to understand you as you're talking, at least for this gentleman, what he was doing was evaluating and judging the person. So as his wife was sharing her viewpoint, he would be thinking to himself, is this right? Does this make sense? Do I agree with this? So that internal chatter was actually distancing him from his wife, because he was trying to understand her from his perspective. So he was taking everything she was saying through the filters of how he saw the world, and then judging of whether it was right or wrong, and then reacting from that. So I said, well, what would happen if you just paused and shifted and made it your mission in life for her to feel heard, understood, valued? Because people, the soul of a human being doesn't want to be solved, doesn't want to be saved, doesn't want to be made right, doesn't want to be fixed, doesn't want to be corrected. The soul of a human being wants to be heard and valued. So I said, just try, again, rather than kind of processing everything through your filters, what if instead you valued the relationship and asked more questions? Said things like, this is what I hear you saying. Is that right? Do I have this right? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Yeah, so I think it's really valuing the relationships over being right, particularly as we age. Because I think as we age, we recognize our ego perhaps maybe starts to take a back seat. And we recognize that thing we were so fixated on, that we were right, you know, we discover maybe isn't as important as we thought it was. And maybe the person we're having that difficult conversation with, maybe that relationship is what's most important. Which kind of moves to the second way we can move from combat to connection, is I don't think we can value the relationship over being right unless we lower the temperature. Unless when we're having those heated conversations, we can somehow manage our emotions a little bit more intelligently. As I like to say, it's okay to be angry. It's understandable to be angry. It's human to be angry. It's natural to be angry. It's never okay to be cruel. So can we lower the temperature? Again, conflict is inevitable, but combat, cruelty, angry behavior, even the feeling of anger is natural. But angry behavior that is cruel is very different than angry feelings. And I think this is where we recognize that, there's a gap between what people say in conflict and how we respond to what people say. And if we can kind of learn how to press pause, widen that gap, and be less reactive and respond with a little more intelligence, respond with a little more empathy, respond with more calmness. I was just reading something about heart math. There's the Heart Math Institute said that people feel the energy of your heart within a 9-foot radius. That the energy of your heart influences people within 9 feet more profoundly than you realize. And so I think part of lowering the temperature is taking responsibility for the energy of our hearts. One way I like to suggest to do that is what I call let the ball drop. That if somebody says something to you, it's like they throw a ball at you. And that ball might be an insult. That ball might be something that you don't agree with. That ball might even be said in a harsh tone or a raised volume. And when they throw the ball at you, I think our tendency is to be wounded by it. So we're hit by it and go, oh. And then often what our tendency is to take that ball and either throw it right back at the person, or sometimes that's not safe or possible. So we throw it at the cat, the old kick the cat syndrome, or we throw it at somebody, a coworker who doesn't deserve our anger. That's where I say, well, what would happen if we're able to get that gap between what people do and how we respond? What would happen if we were able to let the ball drop and take a breath? Now that ball might, we might decide if we can let the ball drop, we might be able to decide, this actually isn't really that important. And we can walk away. Or we might decide, this is really their issue. I don't have to own it. And again, we don't have to pick it up. Or if we've taken a breath and we widen the gap, we can pick up the ball because it is an important issue and the relationship is important. But then we've paused, we have taken a breath, and then we're able to respond rather than react, or we're able to listen. Because I actually believe that probably the most important skill in resolving conflict, or even not even necessarily resolving conflict, the most important skill of moving from combat to connection and trust is listening. And I actually think if you think of a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is you're calm and you're relaxed and you're centered and your emotional temperature is low, versus 10 is your emotional temperature is off the charts, I actually think it's physiologically impossible to listen deeply when you're above 5. So that's where I think it's important to pause. I mean, we give our children when they're having a tantrum, wait, time out. I think sometimes we need to give ourselves, wait, time out. And in giving the time out, I often say, it doesn't work if you say, oh, I can't handle this, I need time out. And then you go away thinking about how wrong the person is and you come back even more angry than you were to begin with. If you actually say to the person, imagine this. Imagine if you're able to say what you're saying. Well, first, you are very important to me. This relationship is very important to me. I really value it. What you're saying is really important to me. I have recognized that a few things have triggered me, and I feel kind of my emotions rising, and I'm not able to listen very well right now. And I want to really listen to what you're saying. So give me 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes. I'm going to come back in 10 minutes. And I really, really want to listen. And then you go away in those 10 minutes and you think about, well, how can I change the energy of my heart? Or you think about, okay, what's my responsibility in this? Or you think about, how can I kind of interact in this situation a little differently? You're not focused on the other person and how they're wrong. You're focused on yourself. And how can I dance? Every conflict is a dance. And we always focus on how the other person is stepping on our feet. Well, maybe it's about, maybe the dance will change if I change the way I kind of interact and dance in this situation. Do you have any tips of how we might be able to lower the temperature?
Yeah, I really like your points, Stephen. And I think that one thing that I take away from what you were saying was that I think you're pointing out to people that you actually have a choice in how you respond to people being provocative or saying something that's that you want to bite back at. Because often what happens is that when we get angry or upset and somebody has said something that makes us feel angry, so the inclination is to bite back straight away. But with saying to pause, and in that moment of pausing, you can take a breath and have a think about, I've got a choice here how I respond. Do I have to respond back to this? And how do I respond back to this? And what's helpful in this time? Because often what's automatic that comes out of our mouth is in response to the anger, and often it can be angry back or cruel. So I really like your suggestion there. I know one time I went to a workshop, when you go to those workshops and there's often something that you get out of it and take away. And the person running the workshop had a saying in it, and it was that if someone's been pulling on your chain all day, the moment you pick up the end, you've lost. Which to me, it's like if someone's been provoking you and wanting to involve you in a heated discussion about something, the moment you say something back that's disrespectful or angry or cruel, you've got back into this same pattern of behaviour with that other person, or like a dance, as Stephen was just talking about. So I think having that sense of control in the moment and choice about how you behave, taking a breath, and also thinking about whether you want to take on this issue also, because you have a choice and you don't have to pick up the other end of the chain. So I think that's a really important thing to highlight, because in the way that people can entice us with emotions, and people can sometimes know what buttons to press to get you angry, and then having a think about it might mean that you may not want to take on that battle. And if you do win it, it doesn't mean you've won the war. So there's a bigger picture out there. And so developing that sense of calm can be really helpful. So I really like that idea about pausing, Stephen.
I think it's also, I like picking up the other change. It's the same kind of imagery as the ball, of letting the ball drop, and just that recognition that you don't have to pick it up, or the recognition of it's really important to pick it up, but you're choosing to pick it up and choosing what to do with it. And to me, it's recognizing, transformation, because that's what we're talking about. Is I really, really believe that relationships can be profoundly transformed if we do conflict better. Because the goal isn't to avoid conflict. The goal isn't to disagree less. I think the goal is to disagree better, so that we have better relationships as we work our way through it. So it's recognizing that transformation rarely happens in headspace, where we're just tossing angry words back and forth from each other, or we're just trying to convince the other person of my opinion, my ideas, how I'm right. And it's recognizing that transformation happens in heart space, where we're able to connect at a heart level. That's where trust happens. That's where connection happens. So whenever I feel like I want to get in an argument, which I love arguments, so that's not an unusual feeling for me. And sometimes, depending on the relationship, sometimes arguments are fun. But, if there's some tenderness there or potential for misunderstanding, sometimes when I feel myself wanting to react, when I feel myself wanting to pull the other end of the chain, I stop and I want to listen to the other person's story. So that's kind of the strategy I use. Is I will say things like, well, tell me a little bit more about some of the experiences that have led you to see the situation in the way that you see it. Tell me your story. Tell me a little bit more, rather than what do you think? What do you think about this? Because you're wrong. Instead, where does it hurt for you? Where have you experienced pain that has led to this particular viewpoint? I was driving on what's called the Parkway here, and this car just pulled alongside me and pulled right in front of me and cut me off. And my initial reaction was, I'm going to pull aside in front of that person and pull in front of them or flip them off or whatever it happens to be. I found that kind of arousal of anger. And I stopped. And it was 7:30 in the morning. And I noticed in the car kids. First, I was concerned for the kids, but then I thought to myself, I wonder what kind of morning this person had. I wonder what's going on in their life. So rather than just simply reacting, recognizing that everybody has a story. And whenever I want to get in an argument, I want to know what the story is that has led to that behavior that's triggering me. So then in doing that, I'm not so focused on being triggered in my feelings. I then shift my focus to the other person. And because I think the goal in difficult conversations isn't necessarily to agree, but to create understanding, which shifts to the next one, which is, can we move from judgment and blaming to just simply being curious? Because I think when we judge others and when we blame others, it just breeds resentment. And I think curiosity breeds connection. And I think curiosity also breaks that feeling of contempt that we have. So instead of judging a person's perspective and behavior, be curious. So if somebody says something you don't agree with, I wonder why they think this way. Or if somebody behaves in a way that kind of annoys you, I wonder why they're behaving the way they're behaving right now. I think of my father, who had Alzheimer's, and his Alzheimer's, he got very angry, and he got angry and hurtful in some of the things that he said. And it would have been easy to be hurt by his hurtful behavior. But there's a phrase that I often use of look for the innocence behind the behavior. His behavior was driven by his illness, his sickness. It didn't necessarily take the pain, to receive someone's hurtful words, is hurtful. But I didn't blame him. I didn't judge him, if that makes sense. I looked for the innocence behind the behavior. And generally behind everybody's behavior, there's fear, there's hurt, there's pain. So rather than simply reacting right away, can we be curious and wonder why they're behaving the way they're behaving, wonder why they're reacting the way they're reacting, wonder why they're thinking the way they're thinking, and also being curious about our own behavior. Why is this triggering me? Why am I reacting so emotionally right now? What is it about this that's stirring up things in me? Why am I behaving the way I'm behaving? Can I behave differently in this particular situation? Does that make sense? What are your thoughts on curiosity?
I think they're all really, really good points, and certainly lowering the temperature and setting the scene and sort of helps open up those opportunities for curiosity. And it reminded me of a story of one of my friends who said to me, Kathryn, I'm just not really liking my teenage daughter very much at the moment. And I said, what's happening? And she said, well, when she comes home from school, I'll say how your day is, and she'll just find something to argue with me about in the sentence. And then I'll defend myself, and then she'll bite back at me, and we just get into this spiral and things start going downwards. And I think that similar to the example you used before, Stephen, when you're talking about the married couple, I sort of said to my friend, what if you didn't respond? And what if you just said to her, I love you, and just leave it at that. And if she keeps on arguing, just say, I love you, or give her a hug, and just don't respond back that same way. And eventually she did try that, and she said it worked, and it actually enabled them to change their relationship of the way, jumping out of the spiral and doing something a little bit differently. And it enabled a different sort of conversation then in terms of the pattern that they were in. They set a new pattern where she could ask her how her day was, therefore being curious, and her daughter started to talk a lot more about what was impacting on her day. And I think that it meant that for my friend, she had that choice. How was I going to behave in this time? Perhaps I'll try something a bit differently, which takes some courage, and also from the person who's wanting to change the cycle of anger and conflict. But it certainly worked very well for them. But I'm sure that scenario, people might identify with that scenario with teenage children. And you can imagine all the things that they are going on in their life at the time, with hormones and relationships and transitions from schools to universities and things. So again, similar to your point, Stephen, that we don't know what's always going on in someone else's life. So we can always be reassuring and share the love and change the patterns that we're in and enable that curiosity. So good points.
Think about, back to that imagery of dancing, that all relationships in some ways are a dance, and we dance together, and sometimes those dances are kind of dysfunctional. And I sometimes think of the jukebox, and so often we think the solution is in the jukebox. If we just change the song, we'll find a different dance. When in actual fact, what people tend to do, no matter what the song is, they dance the same way. And they're stepping all over each other's feet. And if you can learn to dance better, it doesn't matter what the song is. In other words, it doesn't matter what the issue is, doesn't matter what the conflict is, that you have a better dance. And so often I encounter people who focus so much attention on how the other person is dancing. If they just change the way they dance, it would be a whole lot better. And to your point, that if you can focus on yourself, and can I learn a few different steps here? Can I maybe soften my approach here? Can I maybe learn how to dance a little bit differently? Then the person has an opportunity to respond to that. So often we think the solution is that other person needs to change. When we change our energy, more often than not, the other person, sometimes without even knowing it, changes their energy. I also have a story of parents and their teenager was sneaking out at night and doing things that weren't helpful to her well-being and all sorts of things. And they tried everything under the sun to control her behavior. Everything under the sun, from grounding her to locking her in a room to taking away this, taking away that, and nothing worked. And I finally, I said, well, what would happen? What would happen if you shifted your focus from judgment, punishment, restriction, to exactly what you're saying, to trust, affirmation, value? Because the odds are your daughter is going to fall on her face, because that's life as a teenager. And the odds are your daughter perhaps is going to get in a situation that's going to be scary for her, or a situation that's not going to be helpful to her. It could be hurtful for her. Wouldn't you want it? Wouldn't you want her? Well, wouldn't you want you, being the parents, to be the first person she turns to, when she needs help. Because right now, based on how you're responding in the conflict, you're the last person she's going to turn to. So what if you shifted the focus to when she does fall on her face, when she is scared, when she is hurt, even when she's in trouble, you're the first people she turns to. So, how can we build that sense of trust? So it's so important, particularly as we age, I think, to again remember that maybe the goal is to let the other person know that they're valued, even in the midst of disagreement. There's always going to be disagreements. Sometimes we forget to just let the other person know they matter. Let the other person know that our relationship is what really matters. I think it was Stephen Covey who said relationships are a lot like banking. We're either making deposits or withdrawals. And the level of trust and goodwill and positivity we feel in a relationship is really the balance between withdrawals and deposits. And conflict are withdrawals. And they're going to happen inevitably. I mean, again, conflict is just, it's life. So there are always, every day, there are withdrawals from our relationship account. The question is, are we making deposits? Are we intentional about those deposits? Are we making sure the other person knows that even though we might disagree, I care about you, I value you, I love you. I think that's critical. So kind of concluding again that as Harvard, the study at Harvard reminded us that that the quality of our life has everything to do with the quality of our relationships. And the quality of our relationships has everything to do with the quality of our conversations and our capacity to have difficult conversations and our capacity to kind of make our way through conflict in such a way that we actually move towards each other and can move from combat to connection. Any closing thoughts?
I think for me, it's really acknowledging that it takes courage to change a pattern and a style of response to different situations. And it doesn't matter, we don't always have to be successful all the time, but if you can identify a relationship where you might like to change your response I think trying all these ideas that Stephen's talking about, it's worth having a go. Even just making small changes can have larger ramifications. So I would just say have some courage and have a go. And if it doesn't work, just try it again. So thanks, Stephen.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. And I really think we not only can change our lives, but I'm a firm believer that we can change the world one brave conversation at a time. Being willing to have those difficult conversations, and as you said, being willing to try some things differently, being willing to try a different pattern, and to be brave, to enter into that brave space in such a way of how can I move towards this person? How can I value this person? How can I value the relationship over being right?
Thank you so much, Stephen. I think this has been such an amazing, insightful session talking about conflict in relationships. And just to remind people, if they're interested in this, that they're also welcome to donate to the Big Tent project that we have. And certainly feel welcome. You can use the QR code there or the web address. But you certainly don't have to. We're providing this for free out of the best interests of our hearts, aren't we, Stephen? So, but certainly feel welcome to donate. We're also really keen to get feedback on these sessions. So let us know how we did today. So, so both Stephen Koski's and my email address is below, and you're also welcome to provide feedback in a survey. There's a link on the YouTube channel there and on the invitation. So, so feel welcome to give us feedback and ideas for other topics that you would like us to cover. But otherwise, Yes, so feel welcome to join us for the next session, which is on Thursday, the 7th of September, and it's a session on memory and ageing. So I look forward to seeing you at that one. And we have another colleague joining us, Alex Baha-Fuchs from Deakin University, talking on this topic. So, but otherwise, everybody have a wonderful day, and thank you very much. And we look forward to having you join us again soon. Thank you. Thanks all.